the Executive Connect podcast, where we take a deep dive into the minds of executives and learn their success stories. In today's episode, we're going to be speaking with two people, Chip and Adele. Adele is a PR strategist who has managed top PR firms and worked with high-profile clients like President Joe Biden and CEO of Lockheed Martin. Known for her expertise in crisis management, Adele has led campaigns for major brands such as SAP and Verizon. Joining Adele is Chip, a former FBI special agent and hostage negotiator turned business consultant. Chip co-founded the Convincing Company with Adele, leveraging his unique high-stakes negotiations and behavioral analysis. His transition from FBI to corporate world offers a fascinating perspective on how techniques from law enforcement can be applied to business strategies and crisis management. Welcome, Adele and Chip.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here today. Adele, I want to start with you. Ladies first, of course. Given your background with clients like President Joe Biden and the CEO of Lockheed Martin, how did you get into the industry you're in now, from PR to crisis communications?
Yeah, so I started my career at George Magazine as a reporter for John F. Kennedy Jr., his publication that was, the melding between politics and pop culture. And it was a really interesting place to start my career. And ever since I worked there, anytime I whipped out my resume for like another 15 years thereafter, people would be like, "Did you meet him? Was he handsome? Do you know your name?" I mean, like, it was like, it didn't matter what I did 15 years thereafter. They were like, "What? What was John F. Kennedy Jr. like?" But I did that. I was then a reporter. I was an investigative reporter for the Asbury Park Press and then USA Today once they bought them out. But as the person who was the first person to graduate college in my family, I had to pay off my student loans. So I sold out and went over to the dark side, as they call it, on Madison Avenue, launching big .coms, because I did it during the .com era. So eBay, Movie Phone, 1-800-Flowers, got the 1-800-Flowers guy on the cover of Time magazine. And that sort of solidified the fact that I was in PR, because they were like, "Wow, what did you just do? What you just blew this company up." And it was pretty exciting. Did that, and did that for quite a while. Worked with some big names, some celebrities, and then started my own agency. So I did that. I started my own agency 15 years ago. And I've been working with Chip for about 5 years. So I've been in business for myself for a little under 20 years. So I started when I was 5, naturally, because I'm so young. But yeah, so it was really fun. And I got to work with some really high profile individuals. And some of those people were really interesting to work with. Some required different convincing strategies, some of which we talk about in the book. And it is certainly interesting to work with people who are at the top of their game. And it does require a different set of skills and a lot of patience. Believe it or not, it is much harder to work with a big name than it is to work with just any executive, right? It is different. They have different standards. And so it is a little bit of a different process, which I can talk about a little bit more on the podcast. But yeah.
Well, thanks for being here, Adele. I'm anxious to get into it. Now, Chip, you have a similar interesting background from FBI special agent and hostage negotiator. Your experience is equally as unique. You have led the transition from FBI to co-founding the Convincing Company with Adele. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So I started my career with the FBI in the Washington, D.C. field office. That's where I began. And I was on an espionage squad. I did fugitives, drug violations, and espionage. And from there, I transferred to the New York City field office. And that's where I also worked other violations. And I was the team leader for the New York City hostage negotiators.
That's fantastic. I'm excited to talk to you both today. So thanks for being here to talk about crisis management. Uh, Adele, can you share a little bit about your key strategies and how to navigate crisis management and any key takeaways you can share with our listeners?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think when you are dealing with people who are in a crisis situation, one of the first things that we encounter is really is the game of being convincing. So they're going through a difficult time. You have got to sort of get them out of that, like, poor me, fairness. This is like so unfair. I've done everything right for 20 years. We call it the fairness fallacy because some people stay there for a long time where they're just like, this is so unfair. Why am I being portrayed like this? I've done so many things right in my career. Why is this one thing just really, becoming such a mar on my name? And so what we have to do is we have to sort of get them out of this mindset. And that's where, Chip and I working together, we really, we bridge our two disciplines because I can be focused on knowing exactly what they need to say, what they need to do, the strategies, the steps. And Chip is focused on getting people to do what they need to do in these high stress moments, like the emotion that goes into it, which is a lot harder than it sounds. So, I mean, it's really an interesting combination of skills. And I think because we both come at it from different places, the people who work with us, they feel when they're having a crisis, they feel so much calmer. They feel like they understand what's next. And then they also understand why they're feeling what they're feeling. And that's, I think most people in the industry of crisis, while they might be good practitioners, they really don't understand the emotional elements that the executive, the team, people around them are going through. And so we can predict that with some level of certainty. And I don't think many other people in our field can do that.
That's great. Now, I think FBI negotiation techniques are really relevant with what we're going to talk about today. From your perspective, how has that helped you with corporate crisis management?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question because one of the things that I was, transferring from government work to the business sector and working with Adele, it's a I guess I'm used to a different kind of situation. So for example, one of my first times of working with Adele in an engagement, when we first started working together, she said, "Hey, I've got this thing with this company. Could you swing by? I just want to get your read on it." I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And so I go there, and the scene is this. I enter the boardroom, and Adele's already there, and I'm looking around, and here's what I see, Melissa. I got three people off to the corner in the back that are literally crying. I mean, they're sobbing. And then I've got some other people that are sitting at the table and they're like stone faced zombies. It's like they can't, it's like they've seen something they can't process. And then I've just got some other people that are standing around and they are mad. They are just angry. So my take on it from coming from, law enforcement is some people died, right? This is a bad situation. Obviously, they're all dealing with grief and the shock and the stress of all this. I'm guessing that's why Adele wanted me to swing by. So I leaned over to Adele and I said, "So, okay, what do we got? Give me the quick of it." And she said, "Okay, well, one of these people sent an email they weren't supposed to send." I said, What?" I said, one more time. Somebody sent an email they were supposed to, and then somebody died, right? She said, "No, nobody's dead. No, there's no death." I said, "No terrorism, no, nothing like this." She said, "No." She said, "They just literally sent an email that they weren't supposed to." I said, "Oh, this is what it's like," right? So it's a different context, absolutely. But what I found and what Adele helped me understand is that really stress is relative. And, my day to day, yeah, there were times it was life and death. Their day to day is I could lose my job, right? I could lose my my career here. It's my reputation's on the line. I've got a mortgage. I've got another house in the Hamptons. How am I supposed to pay for this?
Let me just say this. We do handle harder things than sending the wrong email. I mean, like, we do handle like multinational crisis, foodborne illnesses, infectious disease. Like, it's not, please do not think that it's just you hire us just to not because you sent out the wrong email. No. Like, we run the gamut in crisis. I just want to throw that in because I just like want to make sure people realize it's more complex than that.
Well, yeah, it is relative.
No, and it
Yeah.
is. And I think you make a really good point is we stress is stress, right?
Yep.
And we all adapt, whether you're an ER doctor or you're working answering help desk calls or you work for the police force. Stress is stress, and we all can handle different reactions differently. So I want to tie kind of what you two mentioned back to persuasive business strategies and how to use kind of what you both have talked about, the blending of PR and negotiation and how to use that in the workplace. And so, Adele, you mentioned a little bit at the beginning about talking about women in business. So how do you integrate persuasive communication strategies in business settings to achieve successful outcomes from a women's perspective?
Oh, wow, this is such a great question, and I do think it's different for women than it is for men. I do. I still think that is a key factor. While I think a lot of the biases have dissipated, they're still there, and women are still faced with there's not that many seats at the table for us, and so women are not necessarily kind to other women. And finding a mentor inside an organization, I never found one that was a woman. And I worked at some big PR firms. I really wanted a mentor. I really wanted that. It was just not going to happen. And so what I tell women in who are looking for mentors is don't look inside the company that you're at, because there's not that many seats at the table for women, and women don't necessarily help other women inside their own company until they're just about to retire. That's one of the things I did find kind of funny, right? When they're just about to retire, women are like, okay, I'll tell you everything I know. Let me just download all these things that, I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't because I felt like you might take my place. It's interesting and fascinating as that is. But as far as persuasive techniques, one of the things I want to mention, and it's a very specific technique. And so if your listeners are really tuned in and dialed into this, I want them to go get a piece of paper and write this down. If you are a woman who is in business and you are firm, and or you come across as maybe maybe some people have said, hey, you're kind of aggressive, or you're kind of bossy, or you dominate conversations, which is so many of us in leadership positions have gotten that kind of feedback, especially when we're in a room full of men. Here's the one technique to use. Never, ever start with your strongest point first. And it is so counterintuitive, because you would think that would make you more competent. It would make you more persuasive. And actually, all it does is it gets everybody in the room to think of the reasons why you're wrong, to dig their heels in for what they believe against what it is you are proposing. So instead of starting with your strongest point first, even though we're taught to do that, start with your point of agreement. Where can everybody in the room agree? And then move them down a continuum. We call it the convincing continuum in our book. And we give specific processes for how to do this, but just a quick thumbnail sketch of it would be: you start with your point of agreement, then you use fear, right? What are their fears about what you're proposing? You use their uncertainty. What is their uncertainty around what you're proposing? To create and cast some doubts in their mind about their own current biases that they may have about what you're proposing. And then this is the sneaky, interesting technique that most people don't do well. Then what you have to do is you have to give them just enough information to inspire them to go research what the possible solution is on their own, so they can convince themselves. But most of us, we start with our strongest point first. We back it up with our emotional argument. We back it up with our fact-based argument. We put all our cards on the table, and we're hoping we are convincing enough. When in actuality, you start with your strongest point first. You examine FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You make them doubt what they believed before. And then you give them just enough information so they want to go seek out more information. And you stop. You don't go to their latitude of rejection. This is based on 40 years of social science research. If you go too far, if you are too forceful, if you are too in people's faces about things, they will reject what you're saying wholeheartedly and never come back to it again to hear your point of view. So what I would say is this isn't about being softer. It's about just changing your approach a little bit. And I think women just have such a hard time with this. It's like, well, I don't want to come across as weak. I don't want to come across as somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about. I want to come across as competent. But in actuality, what you should do is you should be coming across as someone who understands what everybody else agrees with in the room. And then move them down the continuum and stop. Have the discipline to stop.
Well, that is fantastic advice. I think you're right. Women are so used and conditioned, I'll use the word conditioned, to feel like they have to defend their ideas. I mean, they could have the best GPA, graduated from the best school, practiced for 20 years, and they're still used to explaining why their point is right. And so that is fantastic, sound, sage advice, because you're spot on. You just and what's that saying that says, pick your battles? Sometimes you have to let it go. And, circling this back to crisis management and stress, you could fight, and everybody's telling you no, and fight again. And through this whole process, you could become more stressed. And sometimes give your point, like you said, give them just enough, then counterpoint, and just let them come back with you. And sometimes I think just kind of one other layer of that, we got to pick our battles, right? And let go sometimes of that win. But I think we have to uncondition ourselves a little bit, right? I think as women leaders, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, the picking the battles. I mean, I think yes and no, right? It's like if you have something you really believe in, right? It's like, again, though, where do you want to show your competence? I think that's a great point that you're bringing up. Like, where is it really important that you show you're competent? Women want to show they're competent all the time in all areas.
Right.
I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Exactly.
And it's like, it's like you can't be competent all the time. You can't be the smartest person in the room all the time. You have to come at it from a more indirect approach with these convincing strategies.
I love it. That's great sage advice. So Chip, I want to talk about from your perspective, more like the male side as well, talking about some common mistakes businesses make in high stakes negotiation and how they can actually avoid these mistakes.
Sure. One of the things that we teach often is this concept of forensic listening. And really, what it's all about, and I think you agree with us on this, Melissa, is that too often we set up a dichotomy that is a us versus them, or there's two sides, and it's already the feel, the vibe of the whole thing is off. And what we teach is the concept of forensic listening, which is the art and science and analysis of a conversation after it's happened. Because what we say is words leave clues. And so we tell people that we want you to examine a conversation and a person's interactions with you, whether they're leading a meeting or it's a one-on-one call or it's in person, to look at it from four different perspectives. And the first perspective is their voice, their pitch, tone, cadence. Where are they up, where they're down? Where is it that their speed and pacing picks up? The other is the themes that they're developed. What is it that they are repeating? What is it that, because we know that if somebody repeats something more than once, then it's important to them, which means it better be important to you. And the other is the whole idea of body positioning, which we differentiate a little bit from body language, because body positioning is that we are always, creatures of movement and how we interact in the world around us. So it could be, where is the person really, gesturing? Where are they animated? Where are they just kind of pulling back? and maybe their energy drops. And then the other is the emotion. What emotion are they attaching to the themes, and and you hear it in their voice? Where does that happen? And then you can start to dig in why. So you have all those four things. And what we say is you go back after you've had that conversation, do some quick note taking. So, just divide a page up into like four quadrants or some corner of it and write in those things. Okay, here under voice, here this where they were, body positioning is where theme development, and so on. Now you pull all that together, and then you get a kind of a distillation of who they are, what they are, and what is important to them. And then you take that, and let's say you go 2 weeks later, you go up to that person and you say, that meeting that we had on, in increasing our visibility on social media, I just realized that, while you were talking in that meeting, I sensed that what you thought was really an issue that we needed to follow through on was the whole idea of client development and deepening these relationships. And I just want you to know that I took that information and I took it back to my team and I implemented a couple of things that you had mentioned, and it's really made a big difference. And I just wanted to say thank you. Now, imagine that, throwing that kind of thing, framework into your day-to-day talks with clients, interactions with board members, financing, whatever that is. You are connecting with people. And clearly, Melissa, you're very skilled at this, adept at this, but there's so many people that have difficulty with the idea of, well, wait, I've got 4 points that I've got to get. I've got to get the numbers right. I've got to make sure the deliverables are there, and I have to make sure I can depend upon it. And I got to hit all these things. If I don't hit all these things, I'm in trouble, right? No, it's about the connection. You make that connection to a person. You understand them in a way that no other vendor, no other supplier, no other company has yet. Can you imagine the impact? And you'll become a trusted advisor. You'll become that go-to person that they call. So that's what we advise. We advise deepen that relationship, take a few steps back and figure out who they are, what they are, and how they want to be seen in the world, and you'll have a friend for life.
Well said. You're almost reading my mind, Chip. I was going to kind of move in that behavioral analysis after, and I want to just kind of a quick story. You mentioned clients and sales. Years ago, I had been part of a call with a client that I understood his personality, I understood his desk setup, I knew how he moved. I thought I knew a lot about this person, and the people on the other end of the conference call didn't. And the guy kept going like this during the call and kind of rolling his eyes. And everybody like, God, he's such a rude person. Well, they didn't realize that how his desk was situated. His camera and his monitor was in a different location, right? So they thought his body language was really rude. He's not interested. He's not engaging.
Right?
And so kind of to what you were saying is, you know, during FBI negotiations, it's really important to understand and watch body language, tone, voice, the way their body's moving. And so how can these, as we correlate it back to people and their day-to-day, how can these type of techniques benefit business leaders and their day-to-day operations with their personnel?
Oh, that's a great question. Absolutely. And you apply this in terms of, so you take this framework and you apply it to each person on your team, anybody that reports to you, anybody that has an important relationship in the dynamic of your company, you had better have some type of what we call pattern of life on that individual. This is their kind of baseline behavior. And you want to know that person so thoroughly that you're gonna not only detect when they're in a bad mood. Everybody says, "Oh, he's kind of off today. Must have had trouble, bad commute, something going on at home." But you should know that person's hopes, dreams, and aspirations. You should even know the things that they're not telling you. One of the principles in our book is this idea of the unstated narrative, and the unstated narrative is simply that there is a disconnect between what somebody actually believes about you, your company, who you are as a leader, who you are as a salesperson, and what they'll tell you to your face. So we all have to have this, right? In order for it to function as a society, we have to have these rules. But if you're able to get closer to what that person's unstated narrative, what they actually are, reticent about, what is it? What are their holdbacks? Why might it be that they in particular have this one thing that seems to be, just not working? Figure that out. Come close to it. And when you're talking to that person next, say, I just noticed that, when we brought up, and I heard your team talking about that there was an idea that was pushed out, and you seem to really have just went in the opposite direction and kind of shut down. I'm just wondering, is there something behind that? Is there, perhaps, it's just that you have a bad feeling about this one team member? Could that be it? And what you're doing is you're taking, again, your knowledge of who that person is, again, their baseline, what their pattern of life is like. And that might have been out of character for them. So now you're asking them to say, all right, you're identifying one thing. You have a bad feeling about that person. And you're giving them an opportunity to talk and say, no, it's not that I have a bad feeling about that person. It's just that idea, we heard that before, it didn't work last time. And I really wanted the team to stretch. Okay, appreciate that. Thank you for that. And hey, that's great. And then tie it into leadership. Validate them in some way. So all those things. Yeah, Adele?
Yeah, just really quickly to add to that, right? Like, I'm just thinking throughout my career, and Melissa, I'd love for you to weigh in here too, right? Like I'm thinking about all the bosses I had throughout my career, and I would say no one took an interest in what my goals, my aspirations, my beliefs, where I wanted to go. No one really took an interest. I mean, occasionally they would be like, "Hey, do you want this training because it's in our budget?" And we we put it in, and it's like, "Hey, we've got every year it's a yearly budget. Why don't you go do this thing?" No one really took an interest. And I just think if more companies, if more leaders, if more managers took an interest in the people they were actually managing and threw away these old concepts of like the sandwich method and pips, which would never work really because you're never really getting to the heart of the matter, right? All of these things that we're all taught in management and leadership is supposed to work to move someone to change, to move someone to do more of what we want, to change their approach, idea, to motivate them really is broken. And our book, what it really does is it examines what motivates people to change, how you can do it in everyday settings, and things like listening at a deep, deep level with forensic listening. This will make all the difference. If you take one thing away from our book, and trust me, we have like 50 actionable takeaways in our book, more even. But if you take away forensic listening as the one thing that you do, everyone on your team will feel more heard, more seen, more validated, and their emotions will be actually felt by the person that's managing them. I mean, think about the level of retention, the level of excitement people will have to come into their job, the way at which people will work, even if you don't pay them more. If you do this, this is what people want. They want validation more than anything.
Oh, well said. And I also echo you. I haven't had a lot of in my W-2 jobs, I've not had a lot of people that actively were trying to help me get to where I'm going, if ever. And to your earlier point, mentors and leaders in your company, I agree with you, find someone outside your company because they're going to have a bias when you work inside that company, man or woman. So I absolutely echo that from your perspective. And I do listening, the analogy always plays through my mind. You have two ears and one mouth, use them proportionately. And although we laugh and joke about it, very few people are actively listening to understand, because we're listening to respond or defend or whatever the reason that we're listening. And so I absolutely agree with you. And from your perspective, Adele, how do you incorporate behavior analysis from a PR lens? Let's take a look at from your lens using your PR experience and how people can use what they see to effectively communicate in any capacity.
Yeah, so a couple of different things, right? I mean, there's so much you can use from a PR perspective, just from messaging. What does that person sound like? How do they come across? What words do they use? I think, not to brag, but I think I'm really good at messaging because I pay deep attention to how people talk. And and especially when I was dealing with like heads of state, CEOs of major multi-billion dollar companies, my PR counterparts a lot of times would hand them messaging that got all of what they wanted to get across, but did not sound anything like the person they were actually writing them for. And or they would just deliver too many messages at once, and they weren't really taking into account how this person had to memorize and what fears they were had and how they feared they were going to come across. And I think that is so critical in being good at messaging and being good at representing other executives. So that's certainly one level. The other recommendation I would have, and this is like a more simple kind of profiling method, right? And Chip really is like the expert on like reading people. He's so much better at this than me, than I could ever be, right? I mean, he's trained at this. This is like his expertise, and it is not mine. But I would say, like, street smart girl from New York, New Jersey. I think I think I have some good situational awareness. But one thing I would say is understand what your convincing style is like, and know what the other person's convincing style or preferences are like, and be able to adapt. And here's what I mean. So Melissa, would you say you're more, and this is a gut reaction. So it's not like you're just one or just the other, but we think there's two convincing styles, right? You're either an emotional convincer, so you use stories, you use feelings, you use emotions, or you're a fact-based convincer. You use stats, you use data, you use research to bring your point home. What would you say
Stories.
you're emotional? Yeah, I would agree too. That's what I would think too, right? You're definitely a
Yeah.
story-based person, right?
Yeah.
Like that is like how you communicate and how you bring it, right? But when you're talking to someone else who is a fact-based convincer or likes to be convinced from facts, do you adapt? And do you come at them first with facts? And do you come at them with data? And our preference, usually what we like to do is we go, we're going to convince them the way we want to be convinced. And that is so backwards. And just if you come at them from that more fact-based approach, and that's what they want, that's the kind of data they want. And I'll tell a quick funny story. I wanted to buy a Mercedes, and I really wanted to buy one. I had made a significant revenue amount, and I got pushback from my now ex-husband. There's a reason, but to buy the car, right? And he was like, well, we really, I don't really. I was like, okay, he's the fact. I'm like, I look so good in it. Come on, it's the car that I've always wanted. That's, I want a Mercedes because it spells success. And like, again, I'm coming from that emotional argument. Like every time I'll get in it, I'll feel good. I'll remember my accomplishment. And he was like, whatever. Okay. And then I'm like, all right, he's an engineer. That's not how he wants to be convinced. So I went and I did some research. I'm like, Mercedes are the safest luxury car in the market. They've got the best resale value. They've got they maintain the right, whatever. And then he was like, okay, I'll buy it. But I should have bought the car to begin with. There's another lesson in that, ladies. But anyway, I shouldn't have even asked. But the point is that like you have to come at your convincing approach the way the person wants to receive it. And most of us won't adapt at all, because we don't think about it.
Oh, you nailed it. I love that you're talking about that, because I'm very high energy. And if I walk up to a lower, calmer, lower energy person, they're like, whoa, they've been hit by, a train, right? And so I think you're spot on with understanding who you're talking to and how they need the information. So if it's facts, give them facts. If it's stories, give them stories. And really I forget that book, The Five Secrets of Love Languages, or I think there's one in the workplace
Yeah.
now. And so learning who you work with and how they respond is very helpful with success on building teams and working cohesively in the corporate America today.
And one way to determine what someone's style is, and we have this in the book a little, and I kind of love this. Ask them about the most recent vacation they took, and see what they focus on about the vacation. Is it where they stayed, how much they paid, what the hotel was, their experiences? That's more of a fact-based person who's more focused on money versus the person who's like, it was so nice to spend time with family. I got to unwind. That it's just going to tell you so much about who they are and what kind of convincer they are. And most of us just don't pay attention to small talk, but small talk is anything but small. It actually tells you so much about who the person is.
100%. I agree. That's a great tip. I'm going to totally pivot gears now and talk about. I love the discussion about talking about fear and how to overcome it. I grew up with a father that was military. And so what I thought was normal is not really normal, because a lot of times we're paralyzed by fear in the world, like fear of applying for a job, or, fear of flying on a plane, or whatever the fear is. We're so paralyzed by fear. And then when life happens, because it's going to happen to all of us, we're going to have to respond to the situations that happen to us in our life. So I want to talk, Chip. Fear is a significant factor in high stakes negotiation, and what techniques you're using is key during negotiation. And so, can you share a little bit about how to manage fear and maintain composure when you're trying to negotiate anything?
Absolutely. One of the, I guess, leading concepts that we talk about is the idea of the dial-in method, or reversing the focus. So, so for example, as a hostage negotiator, I actually never negotiated with anyone. That wasn't my job. It's kind of a misnomer. My job was to convince that person who had a gun to somebody's head in that apartment to value what I valued, which was life, which was peaceful surrender, which was releasing the hostages. Now, it didn't start there. It never started there, right? Because they're way escalated. They're in crisis mode. They've got that reptilian brain online, and their analyticals are all the way down, if at all present. So my job was to slowly, like Adele was saying, in the convincing continuum, to bring them down from, I want $20 million and a jet, to, hey, can you help me get out of here alive? That was the idea. And that's what now that's a process. But in order to get there, you know, I had to dial into that person to such a degree that everything else falls away. Here's what I mean is that if I'm thinking about, he's got 5 people in there, he's got a gun. And if I'm focusing on the gun, Melissa, I'm lost, because all I'm thinking now is bad outcomes. That guy's got a weapon. He's violent. He's up and down. He's obviously in crisis mode. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the, and I'm thinking about the gun and what it can do. So instead of thinking about the gun, for your example, for executives that are dealing with a high pressure situation, what is that thing that is like a gun to them? It could be, I got to make this number. If I don't get this number in the negotiation, my boss is going to eat me alive. Or I know if I miss the second point here and I don't come through on it, I'm dead. Whatever that gun is for you, get it out of your head and focus instead on that individual that you're dealing with. And,
Can I
yeah,
just
go ahead,
add
Adele.
something real quickly? Because I just think this is such a poignant thing. Have you guys been watching the Olympics? I mean, it has just been, right? It is so interesting. Okay, so last night, and I don't want to date the podcast, but last night there were a bunch of gymnasts, and there was this high beam activity, right? And the best girl fell off the high beam. And then the girl after her, she fell. And then the next girl, she fell, and so on and so forth. I mean, like they all fell. And the girl who won the gold medal was like, I can't believe I won the gold medal because I just did the routine as I needed to. She didn't fall. That's how she got the gold medal. She just did not fall. And I think that that is just such an interesting through line to what you just said, Chip. I think there's emotional contagion. If you see someone in stressful situations, if you think about their stress and you take it on, it can actually make you less effective. It can make you less in the game, less in the moment, and less likely to get the outcomes you want in business. And so I think you've got to take what Chip's saying and take their stress, understand it, and then detach from it. How do you do that, Chip? Like, how do you detach from it? Yes, I'm sorry, Melissa, go on.
Great
But yeah, but
point.
it's
I
interesting.
think
Yeah.
you're right because I call them flashy, shiny things. The gun could be one of the flashy, shiny things. There's a ton of distractions. It could be the bar, it could be the audience, it could be the noise, it could be all the things that's going on around you. And these athletes are, they're in interesting living conditions. There's people yelling. There's a lot going on. People are yelling. They're in a high pressure, high staked environment, and they all want the gold. So to kind of your point is you don't focus on the rain that's outside or the beam that's this or the yelling of the crowd. You focus on your mission. Your mission is to get gold, and it's to land on that beam. It's to cross the finish line. And there's going to
So
be
good.
people that are trying to get you off your game, like everything in life. People are like, oh, she's a really good speaker or he's really good at business. And there's always going to be these people that are taking us off our game. And that
Yes.
is where what you guys are talking about is key, because when you can focus on your game, whatever your game is, and get the emotion out of it and forget about the gun and focus on getting that person out of the room safely. And you can sound convincing and calm, and you can kind of, I don't want to, metaphysically say like throw your energy over the line, but
But you
really
can. You
show them you
can.
mean what you say. And so you're right. I think, Adele, you're spot on. And Chip, I'd love to also get your perspective on that.
Yeah, and it's that simple. It's about, you have to remember is whose crisis is this? You know, not yours. You're there simply to help this person through that. I can't go in, knock the gun out of his hand, pull the hostages out. There's a reason that I have to use my voice to talk to him, but I'm not caught up into what is going on with that gun. I'm caught up with let's deal with your issues. You're it today. We're going to deal with you, because that's the only way I can help anybody.
You
But
dial in so much to that other
yeah,
person,
that,
right, Chip?
that everything else falls away, right? I'm not thinking about the helicopters overhead or the squawking on the radios or the press that's outside or the sirens. I'm only focused in on what's in front of me, just that.
Melissa, what you said about the metaphysical thing, it's so fascinating because when we wrote the book, we actually talked to a neuroscientist whose name is Michael Platt, Dr. Michael Platt, and he's such an interesting and inspiring person to follow. So definitely check out his stuff if you haven't. But one of the things he talks about is this idea of syncing with another person. So you're telling them stories, group activities. There's different ways in which you literally neurologically sync with another person. So what you're saying about it's a thing. It's an actual thing in neuroscience at which if you dial into a person, if you sync with them at such a level, Chip, I saw your eyebrow go up. You could be super effective, right? I mean, like maybe I'm getting too am I
No,
getting too woo
no,
woo?
not at
Okay,
all.
it's
No,
really true,
that's
I
right?
think you're
that's
right. You're right. So if you look at, I'll take one of my favorites, Michael Jordan. I'll take Simone Biles. We saw with her with the gold. They're focusing on what they're doing, right? Everybody's trying to get pressure. Oh, is she going to get another gold? Is she not going to get another gold? Now, when she hears she's not going to get another gold, she can either say, A, screw them, I'm getting a gold anyway, and move it out of her
Yeah.
mind and focus on the gold. Or she could say, oh, you're right. I didn't practice enough. I'm not strong on this. The other girl's stronger. I'm not sure. I'm not feeling great. My stomach's hurting. And we could go down this deep, deep, dark rabbit hole of overthinking, over processing. And so there is some truth to that. As an athlete, I've done a lot of visualizing myself cross the
hmm
finish line, being better than I really was, and really just focusing on not so much everything that was around me, but what was I could control, right?
There it
And
is.
we can't control the gun. We can't control the people on the other side, but we can control how we're reacting and what we can control in our environment. So you're both
Melissa, can you unpack that? I find what you just said so interesting. Could you,
yeah.
for me, could you unpack the idea of how do you get yourself out of that bad space? I mean, I just think that's something nobody really talks about. It's like that overthinking, that over analyzing, that rumination so many of us do. How do you pull yourself out of that? Because there's a comfort in the failure, isn't there? Because the failure is sort of predictable. The success is what's unpredictable. What would you
Yeah.
advise people to? How would you advise them to get out of that loop? I'm sorry, I'm like
No, it's a good
I'm dying to
question.
know.
Yeah. I think, I grew up I was way behind scholastically starting. And so many people are like, oh, she's not going to do this. She's not going to be doing that. And I'll give like my early childhood credit to my dad, because he sat me down young and he said, hey, look, everybody's going to tell you you can't. You have to decide if you can or you can't, and get rid of all the noise. So I think a lot of it's practice. Like, how do we get good at negotiation? How do we get good at confidence? We don't just all wake up with confidence. We're not born with it. None of us are born with it. We have to fall off our bike and get back on the bike again, and fall off again and scratch our knee and realize, we got to slow down downhill. And I think it's just practice. And then when there's that noise around us, like the people that are like, oh, why did you post that? Or why are you wearing that? Or, hey, you're really aggressive in these emails. It's part of its awareness, I believe, that, if somebody, I've been told all kinds of things that I absolutely disagree with, and I tell that person, I'm sorry you feel that way. I have many others who would disagree, and I give them back that energy, right? Because I'm not taking on their, belief that they think that I'm not smart enough to finish first grade. So I'm like, I'm sorry you feel that way. And my dad feels that I'm going to pass it. So I'm going to focus on that. Right. So give it back, give that negative.
Mm-hmm.
When I had a child older, people are like, oh no, you're going to be in the hospital. You're not going to be able to do it. You're too old. And I just, I joke, Adele, I was telling people, hey, I'm making a baby here. Take back your negative energy. And I think it's just as simple as that, is deciding what you let in and what you let out. And when you question yourself, like, I'm sure all these athletes are like, God, can I do it? So-and-so is better. So-and-so is faster. Focusing on you. Yep, I'm going to get gold. I'm going to hit the finish line. I'm going to get a PR. I got this. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling healthy. Sometimes you got to move your body to do it, right? Like, you sit all day, you're like, sluggish. You got to get up and move. So I think, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think really it's not taking in all the negativity that's around us these days, and then
It's like pushing some of it out
pushing
too,
it
right?
back
Pushing it
out.
back.
And if
Yeah.
there is validation for some of it, let's say someone gives you something that you agree with, work on it. Right? I've been given all kinds of advice that I disagree and agree with it. Some I flushed down the toilet, and others of it I actually worked on and made myself a better person and a better leader. And so I think it's up to us to decide whose noise we're going to take on in a world that's constantly moving faster, constantly changing. We're all going to struggle with, what you guys teach, right? We're all going to struggle with making tough decisions. And so I think it's just practice too, Adele.
Yeah. Oh, yes, totally. I agree. Early on in my career, I had someone say, like, you're just not a really good writer. And I'm like, I'm like, okay, that's an interesting piece of feedback. Like, where did that come from? Because I've always been told all my life that I'm a good writer. I'm like, maybe they've got some feedback. But then I went and I looked and I realized they're not a good writer. They weren't a good writer. And it made me go like, I don't really take, why am I taking criticism from someone else I don't respect? I don't think has more talent than me. It's like, I think sometimes we don't analyze that. We just take in that like insult and we internalize it instead of going, who is saying it? Who is the messenger? Because that's also one of those things, right? That can get you out of that dark spiral.
Right? Do you respect them? Do they have what you want, whatever it is that you
Right.
want? So if you're an aspiring CEO or an aspiring mom or an aspiring gardener, do the person that's giving you feedback have what you want? Or do they have the
Yeah.
skill sets? If they don't, and they're not, they could just be, giving you noise, trying to tear you down, all those kind of negative words that go with it. So we get to decide that as humans, and that's up to us and our individual lives and our community that can pull that forward for us. But I want to just kind of in closing get each of your just final thoughts, or anything that I know we've covered a lot of ground, anything that we may have missed, or anything that you want to share with our listeners as we close out.
The one thing I would say is that there was a study done just last year on judgment and decision making, and it said that most of us are as convincing as we will ever be at age 6. And if you're a mom and your moms are listening, parents are listening, you know kids that are 6 are pretty convincing. They're pretty good negotiators, right? By the time you're 6, you understand supply and demand, self-interest. Like all kinds of really high level negotiation tactics. But most of us stop at about first grade from being convinced, because if we sulk in the playground, we're likely going to sulk in the office because it got us where we wanted to go. And so what I would just implore people to do is to take on this book, to read it, to study it, to actually implement these tactics, some of which make you uncomfortable, or maybe some of which you don't want to implement because you've always done it a certain way and you've gotten pretty good results. What I would say is maybe it's you. Maybe some of the strategies that you've used that haven't gotten you the results you've wanted is because you're not willing to adapt. You're not willing to try new things because it's scary. And what I would say is go try a thing or two in our book, just one or two, and you'll be so much more convincing as a result.
And that's a really great point. One thing at a time, not 10 things, right? You keyed one really important nugget is one thing. You can't implement 50 strategies. You can implement one. And I would suggest the one that is closest to achieving success, right? Whatever the easiest low hanging fruit is, hit that first, and then kind of strengthen your muscle and go for the harder thing. So I love that you mentioned one. Chip, any of your final thoughts that we may have missed?
I just would like to, emphasize and encourage, just like Adele just did, is that, these skill sets, like the forensic listening, even if you're just, you can cobble together, all right, I'm listening to the voice here and I'm paying attention to the themes, or, just bringing some of that in to the 4 ways of observing somebody. Use 1 or 2 of them, but you're going to get better as you do this, right? It's about reps, and if you do reps in the right way, that we advocate, you're going to be so much more ahead of the person that just is mailing it in.
Yep.
Because you're trying to make a connection.
Absolutely. Well said. I thank you both so much for being here, your time. Get their book, connect with them. That's the Executive Connect podcast.